From pyramids and mummies to hieroglyphics and pharaohs, images of ancient Egypt have captured our imaginations for centuries. But how did this mighty civilization come to be? And what contributed to its downfall? Ancient Egypt Unpacked. Located along the Nile River in northeast Africa, the area we now know as Egypt has been continuously inhabited for more than 100,000 years. The Nile made life in the dry desert possible, and the region's prehistoric inhabitants harnessed it to support some of the world's earliest systems of agriculture and irrigation. Over time, the villages that sprang up around the river joined together to form larger states that ultimately became two separate kingdoms. Around 5,000 years ago, one monarch, or pharaoh, united these regions, marking the beginning of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Scholars generally divide the history of ancient Egypt into three major periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom began around 2700 BCE and lasted nearly 500 years. During this time, Egypt flourished in an atmosphere of relative peace and political stability. Agricultural output increased, a well-organized government levied taxes to fund public works projects, and pharaohs commissioned the construction of architectural marvels like the Great Sphinx and the Giza pyramids, which were designed to house the mummified remains of deceased monarchs. But by 2130 BCE, things had really gone south. Egypt's growing wealth fueled the rise of a new class of nobles who began to rule as though they themselves were kings, splitting the kingdom into warring factions, allowing agricultural systems to fall into disrepair, and standing by as the pyramids were looted for treasure by thieves. It wasn't long before the centralized government collapsed as well. Things stayed this way for a couple of centuries, but in 1938 BCE, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II reunited Egypt, kicking off the period known as the Middle Kingdom. Like the Old Kingdom, this was yet another era of peace and prosperity for the ancient Egyptians. The pharaohs began construction on an enormous temple complex called Karnak, located in the modern-day city of Luxor. They also forged connections with other empires through trade, sailing up the Nile and across the Mediterranean to obtain precious metals, ivory, wood, and enslaved people, in exchange for Egyptian grain, honey, wine, and beer. But unbeknownst to them, the kingdom was facing a threat from the inside. The Hyksos, a group from West Asia who settled in Egypt during this period, wanted the region for themselves, and their weapons and battle tactics were far more advanced than those of the Egyptians. Their takeover of the kingdom's southern half in 1630 BCE marked the end of the Middle Kingdom. But the Egyptians managed to drive them out a century later using the new methods of warfare the Hyksos had introduced. Now armed with the latest weaponry and battle strategies, the Egyptians set out to conquer as much land as they possibly could. The age of the New Kingdom, which began around 1540 BCE, saw Egypt's rule extend as far as present-day Iraq. The expanded kingdom was rich in natural resources and used enslaved people to repair old structures and construct lavish new ones. It was also during this time that Egypt crowned some of its most famous monarchs, including the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, the young king Tutankhamun, and Ramses II, who built more monuments to himself than any other ruler in Egyptian history. Though ancient Egypt was now more powerful than ever before, the extravagant spending and aggressive expansion that fueled its rise would also be its downfall. By the 11th century BCE, the treasury was running out of money, and construction workers were going on strike to demand their promised food rations. As the government grew weaker, the kingdom was once again divided into smaller states. For several centuries, power shifted between the Egyptians and outside invaders, but the Persian conquest in 343 BCE was the final nail in the kingdom's coffin. Still, this 3,000-year civilization lives on today in the architectural marvels and unique customs they left behind.